The May 9th meeting of the Rent Control Board is called to order. Would the secretary please take the roll?
Commissioner Drawn.
Here.
Commissioner Foster.
Here.
Commissioner Sultan. Here. Commissioner Trosis.
Here.
And Commissioner Phyllis has not arrived yet.
Okay, so please join me in a salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So just a note for all of you who haven't been here before, if anyone would wish to address the board on an item of public comment or a specific item on tonight's agenda, please see Mr. Gwynn to fill out a slip to make that public comment. Now, may I have a motion to approve the minutes from the board's last meeting?
So moved.
I'll second.
Great. Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, no opposition. So before we get to our items here, I'd like to move one item up, if that's okay with our fellow commissioners. I'm sorry, I couldn't see it. Thank you. So I wanted to move 12D up to the consent calendar just for the sake of efficiency. I don't think we have any issues with that.
Zero issues, and I would move the same.
Great. And so therefore, if anyone wishes to address the board on 12D, you can do so during the public comment if we are all in favor of that. So sounds like we have consensus. Do we need to take a vote on that or no? No. Okay, great. All right. So moving back to our special agenda items, do we have any brief announcements from Ms.
Yes,
Condon?
just a
Thank
couple
you.
of announcements this evening. Since we last met, we've held two different workshops. One was the fair housing issues and rental housing that we co-hosted with several organizations. That was very well attended, and we had a lively discussion about fair housing. And particularly interesting was the discussion about gentrification and its potential impact on fair housing issues. So that was excellent. And then this week, Mr. Costello hosted our Tenant Seminar along with one of our newer information coordinators. They made that presentation. And the people who attended, Dan reported that they were very engaged and asked good questions. And they indicated in their evaluation forms that they felt they had learned about the issues of interest to them. So that was another good seminar. And the next seminar will be calculating the annual rent increase that we offer for property owners and property managers to help them calculate the annual rent increase and prepare their notices. That will be on Monday, July 15th from 6:30 to 9 p.m. at the main library multipurpose room. And we ask anybody that's interested in attending that to please confirm with our office, either through our website or by calling, because we want to bring the printout for one of their properties to help them work on that. So we ask that people pre-register for that. So those are the announcements that I have this evening.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have a question from Commissioner Foster.
Thank you. So I was in attendance at a community meeting last night, and there was some concern brought up about the time of day things are offered and frequency. And I did respond that we alternate every other year, whether it's morning or evening, when we switch the seminars. But then was asked, and I said that they're available online, which is so wonderful, and the slides from the PowerPoints. But the point was brought up that they're not available in Spanish. So if someone does want to go back and review a video or the slides, they're not. And I wondered what the feasibility was of offering the slides both in Spanish and potentially adding subtitles to a video.
Well, I appreciate that suggestion. We did used to offer the tenant seminar in Spanish. We haven't done that for a while, so I think that would be a good thing to do in the upcoming year to do the tenant seminar. We will look into subtitling the presentations that are on the website. I think that's a great idea. So we'll look into that, and then one of our bilingual information coordinators could work on that as a project.
The slides should be fairly just quicker one even.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Are all of our informational materials on our website translated into at least Spanish?
They have been.
Okay, good.
And our whole website was in Spanish originally, and it didn't actually get much use. So, and now there are translation programs that make it so easy for somebody who's using a website
Sure, yeah.
to convert it into
Right.
Spanish. But we do have materials available in
Great.
Spanish as well.
Great. Any other special agenda items nope. Okay. Moving on to public comment. This is the time set aside for members of the public to address the board on matters that are not included on the agenda, but that are within our subject matter jurisdiction. But please note that we cannot take any action on any items offered for public comment. With that being said, we have two public comments. Miss Elaine Goldengeeler, you are up.
Okay, this is a instructional PowerPoint, and it's about how you get an owner occupancy exemption for a triplex or a duplex in Santa Monica. Number one, you buy a triplex or a duplex. Number two, you close escrow and move in. So far, so good. Number three, live there for 120 days and apply for your exemption. Number four, submit an application to the Rent Control Board for your owner occupancy exemption. Here's where things start to get complicated. You now have to prove you have lived in the property for 120 days. Owners are forced to go to extremes to do this. Some of the reasonable burdens of proof include utility bills, driver's license, voter registration, clothes in the closet, food in the fridge. But the current tenants are also asked to verify the new owner has moved in, and they have an incentive to delay or lie because their rents may go up. Although not required by the rent board, to combat these unwarranted challenges, many owners are putting on ankle bracelets used by the courts and police, as well as taking daily on-site selfies with timestamps. While owner-occupants struggle to prove they live in their properties, tenants will often claim they don't, with absolutely no proof at all. And what happens next is a sad example of the bias inside the owner occupancy exemption. In many cases, the tenant's words saying the owner does not live in the building is assumed as true over the owner's verifiable evidence. This is what an agency in a one-party town calls due process. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Goldengeeler. We have Mr. Jay Johnson as well. Thanks.
Jay Johnson, is this machine on? Yeah, Jay Johnson, 9th and Alta. This is an appeal for your help on the Preserve Our Diversity program run by the Housing Authority and supported in general by the Rent Board and the City Council, but not promoted, I would argue, enough. In particular, My experience is, in this case, with 4 separate seniors in 4 separate units, elderly seniors over 80, who have certain psychological as well as just issues at a late stage of their lives, who are frankly terrified about signing any papers at all, because they fear they're going to be evicted, even though in effect they're having security for life by being involved in the Preserve Our Diversity program. This only applies to in-place tenants, as I'm sure you know, whereby the housing authority subsidizes the rents. In some cases, in many cases, their own individual rent would be reduced for that matter, but because they're so afraid of signing any papers or dealing with bureaucracy of any type, they're terrified of the experience. Now, last November, in one case where we walked in, I wasn't there actually, that was the housing authority inspector person came in and found a dead body on the kitchen floor. The dead body on the kitchen floor. Someone who'd lived there for 25 years, who wound up being 70 pounds at like 89 years old, who had been a city employee actually, and who I had known for a good period of time, and we had noticed that she wasn't coming out of the apartment. We hardly had seen her. This is a place right across the street from the market, so she could easily get food. When I went in and visited with her, she seemed a bit strange or whatever. There was 0 food in the refrigerator. I got the WISE Center involved, the Healthy Aging people. They did an interview. She was very spacey, who's the president, didn't know the president, the date, etc., etc. So dementia issues. She would have been an ideal candidate for this kind of support. And she didn't even want Meals on Wheels, which I had arranged, because she felt it was going to cost her money. The bottom line is she really needed help. Because she did not get the help in a timely way, she passed away last November, just from simply not eating. I mean, it's a terrifying story, but I'm afraid, and we have 3 other cases where we want to sign up. We want the application. We want cooperation and participation by the 3 other people in different properties, and in each case, they're afraid to participate. They say, if I sign a paper, you're going to evict me. I don't care. I won't touch anything, etc., etc. So the fear factor is what is stalling the process. Obviously, there's some people who wholeheartedly will participate, but in the worst, what I'll call the worst cases, the most at risk, the over 80, the over 90 people, particularly females who are living alone with very little friends and outreach, these are the people that need the help. And if I just finish with 4 points that I'm asking you to do, one is to assist Lucy Loach with the Housing Department on the preparation of the flyer devoted directly towards tenants. Secondly, to ask the City Council to endorse and promote and add their name to the flyer for the tenants. To have the Rent Control Board include this program in the newsletter, and to prepare for the Rent Board itself to prepare a flyer in the office directed at tenants that could be to be on the website, and otherwise promote the program and try and reduce the fear factor that's going on with so many of, at least my experience, on the elderly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate you taking the time to come here. I just have a question for staff. Yeah, well, you can sit down. Thank you very much. For staff, what are we currently doing to promote the pod or are we permitted to promote the pod program? What's the current status?
When the city's housing division was initiating that program, we included in our summer mailing a informational sheet about the pod program, so that anybody who would be interested in it could contact the housing division. So we did help them out in that way. There is a pilot program currently in place. They have not yet scaled it up, but the council has indicated their support for doing that. We will certainly be willing to help in any way if they want us to include an information sheet in when it's time, or information in our newsletter. We can do something about that. We cannot inform people about it because it's not our program. We can tell people about it and refer them to the housing division, but we cannot answer questions about it, because we will leave that to the agency or the department of the city that is helping those seniors. We do understand that there were a number of people who applied and were not able to pull the paperwork together and need some assistance. The housing division does have a social worker, and they refer people directly to WISE for assistance and make those connections with other social service agencies in the city who can help people.
Okay, thank you for that information. You know how much I love education and outreach to the community, so that's great to hear that we've done that, and hopefully we can talk offline if and when this program is scaled up. Oh, yeah, question.
Thank you. So, just out of a personal desire to, I attended multiple Housing Commission meetings when they were establishing the parameters of the POD program, and one of them quickly became that it was restricted to rent-controlled tenants of a certain length of tenancy. So since it's actually, I mean, I understand it's not in any way, shape, or form our program. We set rent levels. That's what we do. But as far as a comforting logo or a formal referral, if someone asks us about it at the information window, are we able to, like you said, not lead them through it, but can we do something to put the seal of approval on it or something, since they are actually only patronizing our tenants? I'm just curious.
Well, we can certainly explain to them the basics of the program, and that we understand that it has helped, the people who have been participating in the pilot project. But we need to leave the explanation of the program to the Housing Division. But, by sending it out in our summer mailing, I think that shows that we thought it was a worthwhile endeavor to send that information out. So we can do that again, or in a newsletter whenever the time is appropriate.
Okay, great. Those are all of the public comments that we have at this time. Now moving on to consent calendars, or a motion to approve the consent calendar. Do I make the motion? Is anyone going to make the motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Okay, second. This is a voice vote, so all those in favor, aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? No. Okay, great. Moving on to jurisdictional items, we just for the public's knowledge, 10A1 has been continued to our June meeting, so we'll skip to 10B1 removals. 1137 3rd Street, Unit H, applicant T. Hacker. Can we please have a staff report?
Commissioners, the 1979 owner of 1137 3rd Street registered a Unit H with the Rent Control Board as a rent-controlled unit. That unit is currently rented to tenant Anthony Zapia. Building and safety inspectors visited the unit on unrelated matters, and they determined at some point that the unit is an unpermitted bootleg unit and that it's only 86 square feet. The minimum area for a habitable dwelling unit under the building code is 220 square feet, with at least one room having to be at least 150 square feet. This unit also violates the minimum habitability requirements under the building code because its ceiling height is less than 7 feet 6 inches by 8 inches. As the bootleg unit violates the minimum habitability requirements for a dwelling unit under the building code, the owner has applied to the board for permission to remove the unit, which has been requested to do by the building division. Because this unit cannot be made habitable within its existing footprint, it cannot be made habitable regardless of whether it can be done so in an economically feasible manner. For that reason, staff recommends that the board grant the removal permit and adopt the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law so that the owner can comply with the orders of the Building and Safety Division.
Okay. We have our owner representative, Mr. or Mrs. Memarzadeh. Oh, okay. You have 5 minutes. Oh, you have to stack up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer. I measured the building, I measured the unit, and I concur with what Mr. Mortazai said.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Ms. Memarzadeh? No. Okay. Thank you for being here. Do we have any comments in the queue? I do not see any. Commissioner Foster.
I just think for the public's education, the Rent Control Board, an agency, never recommend to grant an exemption, or sorry, a removal lightly. This was an unavoidable circumstance in an uninhabitable bootleg unit. The staff report makes it very clear that it's out of our hands or anyone's hands, that it's an item for building and safety and code enforcement. So I move that we accept the staff report's findings of fact and grant and conclusions of law and grant the removal.
I'm not totally comfortable to. Okay. Well, Commissioner Drum,
want to discuss?
did you want to say something?
No, I'll second it unless there's a discussion.
I just am curious to know, and I know what Mr. Lewis is going to say, that it's not within our jurisdiction, but how long was someone living in this bootleg unit?
You could ask what the latest, when the vacancy registration form was filed for this MAR.
No, I'm just very concerned. I mean, this whole situation is very concerning to me, which, I don't want to give anyone legal advice. I'm not here to do that, but I know that this is a building and safety issue. I'm just extremely concerned about why the rent was potentially collected for so long on this unit under the auspices of rent control, and we're only now hearing about this. I think that's really what I'm concerned about, but just on the letter of the law here, I don't see any other option for us, which is also concerning to me and makes me concerned for Mr. Zappa. Yeah. Do you have something? Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Foster, you're still in the queue.
No, you remove us.
Okay. Commissioner Phyllis.
So, I understand what our obligations are legally, but I obviously concur with Chair Terosis that there are problems with rewarding property owners who have availed themselves of collecting rent for years and then elect to take a unit off of the market at a more convenient time. And I'm just wondering, from a policy perspective, obviously, in cases where, I'm even thinking about it from in other contexts, basically where people who have reaped the benefits of certain commercial activity have limitations, or there are some sort of policy or legal limitations in terms of like displacing someone in this context. Can you just provide a little oversight to tenants who find themselves in this situation? I mean, obviously we can't advise tenants on what their rights are or provide legal advice or representation, but this is concerning because it can lead to displacement.
This undoubtedly will lead to displacement. That's the whole point of the exercise here. We are working with various social services opportunities to put the tenant in place with them to make sure that he doesn't become without a place to live, and the tenant is entitled to relocation benefits and other things to mitigate his removal from the unit. But as you alluded to, there may be other legal remedies available to the tenant that have nothing to do with rent control. It's important to understand that the registration of a unit or the application of the rent control law to a unit is in no way a statement of endorsement of the rental of that unit. It's simply the provision of protections against charging more than the lawful rent.
But obviously,
but it may be improper to have rented the unit in the first place, but that is an issue that is outside the purview of the board.
So I have a question then, and maybe we can put this on for a discussion item, but bootleg units are becoming of increasing concern. Under the auspices of the rent control law, we have the authority to implement the rent control ordinance. We're committed to the principles endowed to us in the charter. I'd like a discussion item on whether there are additional measures we can implement to discourage and or penalize bootleg renters of bootleg units, including when they seek to remove them from the market.
I also don't know that bootleg is did we make up this term? I mean, I just want to make sure that we're saying that I would like to look into those who are.
Sorry,
go ahead.
we didn't make up the term. It's not really a term of art, but it's
Right,
it's
that's
a popularly understood term.
Yes, that's true.
In order to have a clean record on this case, the board should first resolve this
Okay,
case.
yes, you're correct. Thank you for that, counsel. Question: was a MAR registered for this unit ever? Yes. So that to me indicates something. Okay. And can you just explain to me why it's not capable of being made habitable in an economically feasible manner?
Too small.
Yes, the Building and Safety Department, whose purview it is to determine habitability, has reached a conclusion within their purview that there's no means at all of making the unit economically viable or not. There's just no means, period, of making it habitable. Right.
What is it, like a garage?
It's essentially a closet.
No, okay, thanks. I'm prepared to continue on this item, unfortunately, and then we can discuss any discussion item after that. So I think we had a motion from Commissioner Foster and a second by Commissioner Duran, if that still stands. Okay. Yep.
It stands with me.
Sure. So, Mr. Gwynn, do you want to take the roll?
Commissioner Sultan? Commissioner Phyllis?
Yes.
Commissioner Duran?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
And Commissioner Trosas?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, before moving on, I think we just had a request for a discussion item moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm going to request a discussion item at our next meeting to consider within the administration of the rent control law and to discourage units that lead to tenant displacement and undermine the integrity of our rent control charter amendment. Additional penalties and or disincentives that could be imposed against renters of bootleg units. I just am asking for a discussion item.
Yep.
And they can advise us on that. So,
Since this is not something that is, not that it's not important or something to do soon, it's not an exigency that we have to do right away. And there's a history of this entire area that it might be helpful to formulate the item for us to discuss it first, and then if you would like to do that, I'd be happy to do that.
yeah, if you want to do a placeholder for bootleg units and revisiting our policy on bootleg units, then we can do it, and we can talk offline about the terms of that. It'll be properly agendized, I'm sure.
No,
are
I'm
you saying that it's
suggesting-
not going to happen at the next meeting?
Right, I'm suggesting that whether it makes sense to do this may be informed by our discussion, and if you don't want to have that discussion, it's totally up to you. But it might be helpful to do that before even doing it.
I'm happy to talk offline about it.
Okay.
About the best time to schedule this item.
Okay, thank you.
I understand that it would be important for us to get through our agenda today before we kind of determine the minutia of what we want to discuss, but just as a matter of public policy, I just want to echo my strong support of making sure that we're disincentivizing this type of behavior, because I am anecdotally seeing quite a bit of an increase in these types of not legally habitable dwelling spaces. So thank you, Commissioner Phyllis. All right, moving on. We have another removal on 1045 Ocean Avenue, Unit 18. Applicant is Aikawa USA. Would we like a short staff report? Can we have a short staff report?
Certainly.
Okay.
Commissioners, the prior owner of this property separated a portion of Unit 7 with only drywall and without permits, called it Unit 18, and registered the unit with the board as a controlled rental unit in 1979. Subsequently, a tenant who had rented both units asked the owner to remove the drywall, separating the units to facilitate access, and the owner did so, but again without permits. Both units are currently rented to tenant Clea Scott. Building and safety inspectors visited the units and discovered that the construction that had been done without permits to remove the drywall, that construction had been done without permits, so they ordered the owner to apply for a building permit to make sure that the work that was done in compliance with the building code. The owner had temporarily relocated the tenant to another unit in the building and applied for the permit. In order to obtain rent control clearance for the issuance of that building permit, the owner has applied to the rent control board for this removal permit. This unit has been carved out. The unit that was carved out was never a habitable unit because it did not contain a kitchen. Having a kitchen is a minimum requirement for a habitable dwelling unit. Because the unpermitted unit fails to meet this minimum habitability requirements within its existing footprint, no further analysis of the economic feasibility for making the unit habitable is required under board precedent. Staff therefore recommends the board grant the removal permit and adopt the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law so that the owner can obtain the necessary building permits to ensure compliance with the building code and so that the tenant can return to her unit.
We do not have any public comment on this item. Do we have any comments from our commissioners? Do we have any motions? Okay, no one wants to say anything.
I'm moving everything all night, so I'll move this one too. I again hate to see any unit removed or a mistake rewarded, but in this case we have no choice but to remove the unit since it's being combined into another one. And I move that we support the staff report's findings of fact and conclusions of law and grant the removal.
Just to clarify, I don't think it's being combined. I think it's been like that, correct?
Yes, it has. What was separating it was the drywall. The drywall was removed, and what is occurring is that the building division wants to make sure that it's done in a proper manner.
So the tenant's temporarily relocated, but then they will gain access to the whole thing again.
Yeah, they were already renting both units anyway.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Okay,
Is there a
great.
sec?
Yeah,
Second.
great. Can we take a vote?
Commissioner Duran,
Yes.
Commissioner Phyllis,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Sultan, and Commissioner Terosas.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great. Okay, so moving on to administrative items 12A, announcement of the 2019 general adjustment. Do we have a staff report?
Yes. So by the terms of the charter amendment, the general adjustment for any given year is equal to 75% of the percentage increase in the consumer price index for the LA, Riverside, Orange County region. So this is a simple mathematical calculation. The annual increase between March of 2018 and March of 2019 was 2.7%. 75% of that is 2.02%. which is rounded to the nearest 10th decimal place. So this year, the general adjustment will be 2%. The city charter also gives the board the opportunity to apply a ceiling to the general adjustment after holding a public hearing and hearing from the interested parties. So we are recommending that the board set a public hearing on a potential ceiling for the June 13th meeting. And by the calculations specified in the charter, that ceiling would be $44. So that is the information we have this evening. We just ask you to set the public hearing for June 13th.
We have no public comments on this item. Commissioner Foster?
Yes, I would make a motion that we set for public hearing at the next regular meeting of the Rent Control Board, a public hearing to discuss the rent ceiling.
I would second that. Could we have a vote? Or is there any further discussion on this item? Okay, everyone's super quiet today. All right, can we have a voice vote? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions? Nope. Okay, that carries. Moving on, so we will have that on the agenda next month. Moving on, very exciting. We have our fiscal year 2018-19 third quarter budget report. Can we have a staff report?
Yes. So the main purpose of tonight's study session is to review the fiscal year 1920 proposed budget, answer your questions, receive direction on any changes you'd like to consider, and then set the budget for public hearing and adoption on Thursday, June 13th. Before we do that, it's helpful to review the board's experience as of the third quarter of the current fiscal year. The board received a mid-year report in March on this year's budget, so tonight I'm just going to give a very brief update. The written report provides additional details. Our current projections show that by the end of the year, revenue is expected to be approximately $61,000 higher than the $5,286,000 originally anticipated. The variation is due primarily to higher than anticipated registration fee collections of approximately $50,000 and interest earnings higher than anticipated of approximately $11,000. It now appears that expenditures will be approximately $8,000 less than the adopted expenditure budget of $5,241,000. Savings in the salary and wages lines for permanent employees will offset the over expenditures in legal expenses and election costs. I provided some information about the election costs in the written report. They were significantly higher this year than we had projected due to some increased costs through the county, as was explained to me by the city clerk. So although she had originally proposed that our share would be about $85,000, we talked about it a bit and it was reduced to $71,659. So it's still a significant cost, but that was the cost this year for our election of 3 commissioners. So the bottom line, given the increased revenue collections and the overall reduced expenditures, we anticipate the originally projected small surplus for fiscal year 18-19 of approximately $44,000 will be increased to approximately $113,000. And the second payment to the city of $49,000 for the loan on the PERS prepayment will be transferred to the city at the end of the fiscal year, leaving approximately $64,000 to be added to the board's fund balance. So that's basically where we stand for the third quarter. And I give you that information just in preparation for spending a bit of time talking about the 1920 proposed annual operating budget. So now I would ask you to, if you have any questions about the third quarter, Ms. Noseworthy, and I would be happy to answer them. Any questions at this point? Okay, so the discussion of the upcoming year, this is informal. Please stop me as we go along, ask questions. This is our opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. As I said, this gives you an opportunity to review it before setting it for public hearing at our next meeting on June 13th. The rent control law provides that before July 1st of each year, the board must hold a public hearing and adopt an annual budget for the upcoming year. To finance the agency's reasonable and necessary expenses, the board may charge landlords an annual registration fee, and owners may pass through half of the fee to tenants as a monthly surcharge on their rent. The proposed budget represents our best estimate of the board's revenue and expenses for the coming year. Because the budget predicts future events, it's an educated prediction, but as always, we strive to be as accurate as possible. The proposed operating budget for fiscal year 1920 projects operating expenditures of $5,178,640 and revenue, or $840, and revenue of $5,311,535, resulting in a projected surplus of approximately $132,000. For the third year in a row, the budget is based upon a $198 per unit annual registration fee, and we're not recommending a change in the fee this year. The upcoming year, like this one, will be another year of change for the agency. We anticipate that 2 staff members will retire and that we will finally implement our new property and rent tracking system, the cost of which was allocated by the board with the adoption of the fiscal year 18-19 budget. As you saw in the written memo that accompanies the proposed budget, the agency's system administrator, programmer, analyst plans to retire near the end of 2019 when the data conversion portion of the database replacement project is complete. Upon his retirement, a business process technology analyst in the city's Information Services Department will provide support for the agency's new database implementation and on base document management system and other technology needs. The salary and benefits costs associated with that position for 7 months are included in the budget, allowing for 1 month of staff overlap for training and transition purposes. The legal secretary also plans to retire near the end of the year. As we prepare for her retirement, the legal department will evaluate the level of skills required to support the department. It's likely that position will be underfilled by a staff assistant, and we've included the funds for that level of support in the permanent employees budget line. Funds are also included for a short period of overlap for training and transition purposes. So, Mr. Gwynn, did we have the PowerPoint presentation? I'm sorry. So we have a few slides just to highlight some of the information within the budget. Thank you. So as in fiscal year 1819, the board's 1920 budget reflects both operating expenses and a few additional expenditures. The continuing capital improvement project to replace the database, a third payment on the loan that the board received from the city in 2017 to accelerate the paying down of the agency's unfunded pension liability, and a proposed additional PERS payment to further accelerate the paydown of the agency's unfunded pension liability. On April 30th, the City Council held a budget study session to consider the city's proposed fiscal year 1921 biennial budget. Among the recommendations made that evening, and which the Council will consider when they adopt the budget in late June, is an accelerated 13-year paydown of the city's unfunded pension liability, which would result in an anticipated $106 million in city savings over 30 years. If the council elects to expedite the paydown, the agency's 1920 additional contribution would be approximately $90,000. This payment is currently itemized as a potential expenditure in the table on page 21 of the budget, but if the council approves the paydown plan, this expense will be moved into the board's 1920 operating expenditure budget. This change would increase the overall expenditures for 1920 to $5,269,000 and reduce the anticipated surplus at the end of the fiscal year from $132,000 to approximately $42,000. So we do have sufficient funds in this year's budget to cover that additional expenditure. Before we look at the budget expenditures, I'd like to mention a couple of things about agency staffing levels and review the goals we're proposing for fiscal year 1920. Again, feel free to stop me as we go along. This chart, which is also in your budget book behind the Agency Organization and Goals tab, shows the organizational structure of the agency. In a service organization like the Rent Control Agency, our major resources are the people who provide services to the community and advise the board. In 1920, the agency will have 24 positions, one less than the current year. We're deleting a systems administrator, programmer, analyst position that has been vacant for several years, but which we had retained in case we needed it to help assist with the database project. We've determined that's not necessary, so we're eliminating it now. As you'll recall, the board modified the budget last September to add 3 positions, 2 hearing officers and a hearing investigator. These were limited term positions that allowed the agency to recruit for and hire new staff members in preparation for 3 retirements in the hearings department. Those positions are not included in this budget and do not affect any individuals because those temporary people have now assumed the permanent positions. In addition to our permanent staff members, a few as-needed or temporary employees are also assisting us. With the addition of a hearing officer position in 2017, we had anticipated a reduction in our use of as-needed hearing officers. However, with several retirements from the hearings department and given the time required to train new hearing officers, as well as the level of petition filings and the complexity of some of the cases, we've continued to need the services of as-needed hearing officers. Additionally, a mediator and paralegal are assisting the hearings department with mediations and organizing and analyzing the extensive documentation and testimony in construction decrease cases with multiple parties. Finally, retired info analysts are assisting the public information department while we have one information coordinator on an unpaid leave, and they will assist the department in the upcoming busy summer months and while we're training a new information coordinator who will be hired in the near future. So this year we've allocated close to $52,000 in the upcoming budget to cover the costs of as-needed employees. The next few slides show the agency's goals for the upcoming year, and these are on page 3 of your budget book. Here we've listed broad agency-wide priorities that are supplemented by objectives we'll pursue to achieve these goals. I'm going to mention just a few. Under the first goal, increasing efficiencies through the use of technology, we have 2 major priorities. First is the replacement of the rent database that we've been talking about for a couple of years or a few years and hope we'll see come to fruition this year. Once that system is implemented, we'll conduct constituent training in how to use the system for filing forms and petitions, paying fees, and assessing documents in the agency's property site files. We'll also continue to work this year on improving the user's experience with our website. Mr. Costello has been the agency's lead on the city's website redesign project, and we're collaborating closely with them on that project. New systems require staff training, so we've also noted that as a goal, not only will staff members be trained on our replacement system, but also we're committed to training staff on any new systems the city implements. The second major goal area is ensuring compliance with the rent control law. In this ever important goal, we will communicate with tenants and owners about any changes in the law. To ensure owners properly notify tenants of the annual rent increase, we will assist owners with completing the notice of change in terms of tenancy forms for the 2019 general adjustment. We also plan for any possible changes in state law that impact Santa Monica's rent control law. These could be amendments to the Ellis Act, changes to the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, and changes to eviction procedures or timelines, to name a few possibilities. We will also continue to initiate civil actions as necessary to enforce compliance with the law and pursue unpaid registration fee balances through collection activities in small claims court. Our next goal is to collaborate with other city departments on common goals, and this year we'll continue to collaborate with various city departments, including code enforcement, building and safety, planning, the city attorney's office, and the Office of Communications to ensure that property owners and tenants understand their rights, responsibilities, and obligations. At the board's request, I will be inviting representatives from building and safety to give us an update on the seismic retrofitting program and also an update from the neighborhood preservation coordinator on any changes to their processes and procedures. I'm hoping we can schedule that presentation for July or August as the June meeting is full with our regular business. The city is always looking for ways to improve sustainability and conserve energy, and when city staff is considering a new program, they will often contact us for any input we have and any data we can share, and we will continue to collaborate with these departments. Finally, we will continue to prepare for staff changes as that seems to be something that's become kind of regular. I mentioned earlier that we expect 2 retirements this year, so we will continue the cross-training that we've been doing of our existing staff and develop effective succession plans and continuing in the coming year. And these changes will also demand that we put into place effective orientation and training programs for the new staff members. So those are our overall big goals in addition to the day-to-day operations of the agency, and we welcome your suggestions and comments on these goals, and we hope to hear from the public on this topic as well. Sure. You have a question?
What? Yeah, I just have a question. What's been the percentage increase in hearings that we've been experiencing year over year? Do you happen to know? Like, if
don't-
you had to estimate, like, do we have is it like a steady increase? What, like, is it a 10%? How much?
Well, I think there has been an increase. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't know if Ms. Noseworthy knows that. What we have had is an increase in very complex
Okay.
hearings. The construction decrease cases can be very complex with a lot of documentation, a lot of evidence that's presented, and some of this is occurring in very large buildings. So we have multiple parties participating. So that has been very demanding on the hearings department. We can certainly bring back to you a specific answer to your question.
Yeah, I always think it's good to look at budgeting based on both performance and workload. And obviously, I understand there's some, intangible items. I mean, I'm assuming we're not tracking like hours spent on hearings, or maybe we are. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. But in any event, I would be curious to know what, if any, is the percentage increase year over year in the number of hearings that we're experiencing, and it would be interesting to see if that ties to the economy at all. That's it for questions. I have other comments, but Commissioner Foster.
Thank you. So first of all, I think I've said this every year. I am in shock and awe at how close you come to your projected budget every single year. That is a model for any city agency or department to follow anywhere. And it's incredible the work you're able to do with pinpoint accuracy. And of course, things ebb and flow and come and go, but to get it to within 2% is just and usually on the plus side. Better to have enough than not enough, and to do it again without raising the registration per unit rate, which some in the community thought would just be a sure thing as soon as we had the authority to do it, that we would do it. And here you are, the third year again, after a couple years before that and 7 years before that. Very judicious with the money of both tenants and landlords, and I think we all appreciate that. I just wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't have one little nitpicky question. So on overtime,
Okay. So I did want to, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Oh.
but I did intend to talk a bit about the expenditures as well. So we can either do it.
Oh, okay.
just
I didn't know
like
if your
questions.
presentation was finished.
Yeah, no, I was just talking about the goals. No, that's fine. I
okay.
kind of paused to see if you had any comments about that.
Yeah, I mean, just we just had a big overshot on overtime, and I know in my business we have to authorize overtime, and so I just wondered if there was a discussion on that. That's the only thing I saw that got my attention, and
Right.
pretty much in the whole thing.
So what we were talking about in terms of the demand on the hearings department is primarily what resulted in the significant increase in overtime this year. We were using more as-needed hearing officers to assist us. One person was handling an as-needed person handling all of the mediations. We envision, and plus the turnover in the hearing staff really made a difference. We lost hearing officers who were very experienced and now have hired newer hearing officers who were in the process of training. So that made a demand to use as-needed hearing officers as well. We believe that this year will give us the opportunity to get those people trained, to have a full 3-person staff of hearing officers. It will give us this year an opportunity to evaluate whether that will be a sustained need for additional support for the hearings department, or whether the addition of the third hearing officer in 2017 will be sufficient. So for the coming year, we've reduced our projections for what we will spend on as-needed employees. Because we were overexpending as needed, but we were having savings on the permanent employee salary line, that was offsetting that, so it didn't require any increase in the budget overall. But we realized we were overexpending what we had projected on the as-needed employees.
Thank you.
All right. Can I ask a question, or not a question, but make a comment on the goals, since that's the section that we're on?
Sure.
I think that, we know that, as people colloquially call it, we're in the silver tsunami. There's a lot of people retiring. I think we can't underestimate the need for succession planning. I fully support making sure that our newer staff is trained and ready to take on leadership opportunities when there are leadership opportunities. I think it's good for morale. It's good for professional development. I'm fully supportive of not just saying prepare for staff changes, but proactively embark on succession planning. And then, I'm all about being proactive. I don't see anything here about education and outreach to the public about what we do and the services that we offer because education and outreach is really a good way to cut down on those bad actors, just by letting people know what their rights and responsibilities are. So I would like to see that incorporated in some. I know maybe using technology we can incorporate it there, but
Sure.
Yeah,
we
that's
can
just
do
a
that.
comment. Right.
Before you approve the final budget, we'll add some language in with respect to that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, you can. Any further comments on goals? Okay, keep going.
Okay. What did I do with my? Just a minute. Okay, so this is a kind of a shortened version of the budget page, but the full budget page is on page 1 of your budget book, behind the tab that says Proposed 2019-20 Agency Budget. And then following this budget sheet, every line item is itemized in the pages that follow with a little explanation about what that particular expenditure is for. The fiscal year 1920 budget maintains the current operations of the agency. It includes funds for 2 newsletters and the summer mailing, plus 1 additional mailing to inform property owners and tenants about the enhanced services and processes available through the new property and rent tracking system once it's implemented. We anticipate presenting 5 or 6 seminars throughout the year, including, as we discussed earlier, a tenant seminar in Spanish and a new seminar on the rent tracking system's functionality. The budget includes funds for 1 to 2 board meetings per month and provision of the highest level of public service in our day-to-day operations. The proposed expenditure budget, as you see in the right-hand yellow column, bottom line is $5,178,000. If the council approves the additional PERS paydown, the proposed expenditures will be $5,269,000. As I mentioned earlier, the major resources of the board are the people who provide services to the community and advise the board. The first line in the budget is staff salaries, deferred compensation, and other payouts provided for by the Memoranda of Understanding with the board's bargaining units. This line also includes costs associated with anticipated retirements. The compensation for the as-needed employees we've discussed is reflected in line item 511-400 at $62,000 in the coming year. The workers' compensation costs that we saw jump significantly a couple of years ago have equalized or sort of leveled out a bit, still significant, $103,000. But if we don't have any additional injuries or occurrences, that will go down in future years. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So over the last 2 or 3 years, we've discussed the pooling of our employees with maybe people who put out fires and climb poles and go down manholes for a living. Is that still the case, that we're lumped in together?
We are in the big pool with the city.
And have you analyzed that to see if it's advantageous?
Well, what we wanted to see was the Big Blue Bus separated their workers' comp. And we wanted, of course, their jobs are very different than our jobs for the most part. They're out there driving on the streets every day, most of the buses. But we wanted to see what the experience was for them. Because we are such a small agency, we can't, and the city self-insures for workers' comp, we can't possibly do that on our own. So we can look into that, but for now, this is the expenditure that they are predicting or projecting for us. We can look into that, but we're waiting to see what's happened with the Big Blue Bus, and I don't believe that we've gotten any report on that. We'll look into that.
And is everyone in the agency coded as a clerical worker, or except
for
maybe the investigator?
I believe an office worker, yes.
Yeah. That's exorbitant. Okay.
Well, unfortunately we've had a number of incidents or injuries. So, okay. Health insurance costs continue to rise with a projected increase in the coming year of almost 5%. Some of the insurance costs are offset by employee contributions toward the cost of the premiums for their selected health care plan. The premiums of $448,000 for health, dental, and vision insurance are shown in line 512203. The retirement contributions in line 513000 are set at a contribution rate of 24.173% of staff salaries. And just as a reminder, the agency does not pay into Social Security for our employees, so PERS is essentially the equivalent of Social Security for private sector employees. So that is the primary portion of the budget, is the permanent or the salaries and wages section. In the supplies and expenses section, I want to mention just a couple of items. The indirect cost line reflects the cost the city assesses the agency for various services, such as maintenance of office space and services provided by the Departments of Human Resources, Finance, Purchasing, Facilities Maintenance, and Information Systems. You'll find details about these charges on pages 5 through 9 of the budget, and the $306,000 in this line represents a 2% increase over last year's allocation. The other cost line covers cable costs for televising 14 board meetings. The major difference here from last year's budget is that there will be no election during the upcoming fiscal year. In the legal expenses line, the proposed budget allocates $50,000 in legal expenses. The board is currently defending a handful of lawsuits in which the plaintiffs are seeking monetary damages, in addition to attorney's fees. It's Mr. Lewis's view that most of the currently filed suits against the board lack merit, such that the board should prevail in them. Nonetheless, because litigation is always uncertain and no result can be guaranteed, it's prudent to budget for the possibility that damages or prevailing party fees will have to be paid. Additionally, the board has hired outside counsel to assist with one litigation matter that consolidates two cases. Work on that matter should conclude early in fiscal year 1920. In the service agreements line, it's a little higher this year, and that's because while we're transitioning from our existing database to the new database, it will be necessary for us to maintain service agreements for components of both systems. This results in this one-time occurrence of the higher service agreements fees, and in the future they should be approximately $26,000 less than the $80,000 allocation this year. The capital outlay section totals $48,500, which in addition to covering minor adjustments in workspaces, the cost of computer-related purchases, and the lease on the copier, it also includes $14,000 in payments for participation in the city's computer equipment replacement program. This provides for computer replacements every 4 years, ensuring that the agency is able to take advantage of newer computer technology and maintain functionality with the rest of the city's systems. I've already spoken about the non-operating expenditures in this year's budgets, and they are detailed on page 16 of the budget book. Finally, turning to the revenue, the board's main source of revenue has always been the registration fee charged for each unit. As I mentioned earlier, this budget is based upon a $198 per unit fee, which is the same as we've had for the past 2 years. We anticipate billing 26,426 units this year, collecting approximately $6,000 of past due fees for a total of $5,238,000 in registration fees. During the course of the year, as certain units become eligible for fee waivers or are granted exemptions, we issue refunds of fees, and we anticipate those refunds to be approximately $12,000. The other major source of revenue in previous years has been interest earnings on city-invested rent control funds. That source has contributed less to our revenue in recent years due to low interest rates. This year, the city treasurer has told us to project 1.96% return on our invested funds, resulting in anticipated interest earnings of approximately or almost $80,000. The other sources of revenue are fairly de minimis and include $2,000 for administrative record charges, $2,200 in filing fees, and $1,800 in miscellaneous charges, all totaling together about $6,000. So as I mentioned, with the projected revenue and expenditures, we anticipate ending the year with net revenue of approximately $132,000. If we make that additional accelerated PERS pay down of approximately $90,000, that will leave us with a revenue projection, net revenue of $41,888. So that is the budget report that I have. Ms. Noseworthy and I are happy to answer any questions for you. And I just want to thank Lima and Lonnie for the hard work that they do on the budget. As you said, Commissioner Foster, Lima does a remarkable job of putting all the details together and projecting what the costs will be, and is almost on target every year. So I want to thank her.
She's all ours. You can't have her. All of you.
Right. And Lonnie helped a lot this year as well in the preparation of the budget book and tracking the expenditures, and want to thank him as well. All right, so if you have any questions, we can answer them, and if not, then we'll set a public hearing on the budget at the next meeting and adopt it at that time.
I just wanted to thank everyone. You guys did an amazing job. Thank you, Tracy, for explaining all of this very thoroughly. I don't think that I have further questions apart from what I'd already asked. Does anyone have questions? No. Okay, so I will move to set this for a public hearing at the June meeting. Do we need a roll call vote for that, or a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No opposition. All right, great. So we'll set that for a public hearing at our next meeting.
Great.
All right, moving right along. We have, yes, the resolution, 12E, a resolution of the Rent Control Board to urge City Council to amend the municipal code to ensure that we are not issuing permits to non-necessary work in tenant-occupied units without the tenant's consent, and prevent the reconfiguration of units that are currently controlled or that have been subject to control and may again be subject to control in such a way that a unit is eliminated or reconfigured so that it's more easily converted for rental to separate households. We do not have any public comments on this item, so I'll move straight to our commissioners. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please give us a staff report, Mr. Lewis. I just was so excited to get talking about it. Go right ahead.
Although it was staff who placed it on tonight's agenda, this item ultimately originates from two concerns that the board has expressed numerous times over the past year. While distinct, those two concerns are closely related. The first concern is that the city sometimes issues permits for work in tenant-occupied units when the work is neither necessary nor agreed to by the tenant. Of course, it's impossible to perform work inside a unit that's occupied by a tenant without entering it, or even one that's not occupied by a tenant. But state law specifies that a landlord may enter a tenant's unit to perform work only if the work is, quote, necessary or agreed upon, unquote. Local law makes abusing the right of access to a tenant's unit a misdemeanor. And yet, armed with a city-issued permit, landlords are not only entering tenants' units to perform work that is neither necessary nor agreed upon in violation of state and local law, they sometimes remain there for extended periods while performing that work. In some cases, the work is sufficiently extensive that the tenant can't live in the unit at all while the work is performed, and the city gives its approval to a means and methods plan under which the tenant is temporarily relocated to another location altogether. In these situations, a city-issued permit is used to displace a tenant from his or her unit entirely, even though state law and the city's own law make even the landlord's entry into the tenant's unit unlawful. This problem arises not because the city wishes to be complicit in landlords' unlawful entry into tenants' unit, and not even because landlords wish to enter tenants' units unlawfully. Rather, it arises because landlords wish to perform upgrades that they believe will add value to their property, and the city's planning and building officials understand themselves to be charged not with ensuring an affected tenant's occupancy rights, but only with being satisfied that the work that the landlord wishes to perform complies with the applicable technical codes. But even with no ill motive, the result is that people's tenancies are being unlawfully interfered with, and with the seeming imprimatur of city government. Because the genesis of this problem is that while one set of laws prohibits a landlord's entry into a tenant's unit to perform work that isn't necessary and that the tenant hasn't agreed to, another set of law appears, at least implicitly, to allow a landlord to do just that. The second set of laws is within the city's purview, in the purview of the City Council. By proposed resolution 19003, the board would recommend that the City Council eliminate any suggestion, express or implied, that a landlord may enter a tenant's unit to perform work that is neither necessary nor agreed to by the tenant. The second concern that the board has raised, and that is addressed by resolution 9003, is with the alteration of controlled rental units that are vacant and that may be temporarily exempt from rent control at the time of the alteration. The board is concerned specifically with alterations that, while they do not formally divide a single unit into two, come so close to doing so that such a division can be accomplished with virtually no expense or effort at all. Excuse me. Sorry. After city issue permits have closed. In many cases, the division isn't total, but merely provides separate locking sleeping quarters with shared living rooms or facilities. This is a problem because it makes rent-controlled units so unattractive to anyone looking for a permanent dwelling that they are effectively unavailable for regular residential use. There are in many instances that the board has already observed, used for short-term or medium-term housing, a use that is inconsistent with the proper use of rent-controlled units as articulated by the Court of Appeal. These alterations, which reconfigure a unit nearly to the point of formal division, but not actually at that point, have been accomplished with city-issued permits. City staff charged with issuing those permits have been unable to deny them, even when it is clear to the staff that the owner's true intent is to effect an unlawful division of a unit, because the alterations that they are applying to make are at the very limit of, but do not exceed, what current law allows. The proposed resolution urges the Council to amend current law as necessary to give permitting staff the ability to deny such permits. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Foster.
Thank you to staff for articulating so well what a lot of us individually have been hearing about from our constituents and working on in various capacities. I can't begin to tell you how often I will hear from a tenant or a constituent who says, well, they've got the building permit. There's a big sign in front of my building with the picture of my building transformed. And sure, I mean, who wouldn't want a little bit nicer facade, but what does that mean for me? Or they intimated that because they have a permit, I better just go and I should take this buyout. I mean, it's just led to such confusion among tenants, leading to displacements, leading to perhaps unlawful buyout offers. The list goes on. And I would add one item potentially to this, and I don't know if it's worth adding into, it's probably not necessary for the language, but the intent, I would hope, and I can testify before City Council like anybody else, but I'm concerned about common areas as well, because I know that it's perfectly lawful to apply for building permits and to rehab or gut renovate perhaps one unit at a time as they become vacant for any number of reasons. However, when I see common areas ripped apart, and let's say the tenant who does not consent to having anything done to their unit is on the second floor, and yet a staircase is ripped out, thereby forcibly removing the tenant from their unit, even though they didn't want to participate in any of this and continue to have the quiet enjoyment that they're entitled to under law. So in both cases, both parts, part one, that it's non-necessary work. Of course we want our buildings maintained. Of course we want a water pipe repaired or something dangerous repaired. Of course, that's in the normal course of business. And when I see buildings with peeling paint and degrading conditions, that don't need to be that way, it's upsetting. Those things need to be repaired in a timely fashion and with permits. But when it necessitates a tenant's loss of half of the features of their lease and or temporary removal, we've just seen this abuse too many times, and it is completely contrary to the entire point and mission of our charter. And I strongly urge my fellow commissioners to support this resolution. Thank you.
Okay, it doesn't look like anyone else has a comment. I mean, I do. If you have if anyone from the public has a comment, they should definitely go to Mr. Gwynn and submit a chit sheet. Thank you. We can consider some late comments here. I mean, I would say that we have seen an epidemic surfacing around this topic. It's definitely calculated, I think, what's going on. And I personally, and I know my fellow commissioners, have urged City Council to take action. And I think now we need to make that an official resolution from the Rent Control Board, because to me it's clear that my individual voice is not really coming through as loudly as I'd like it to be. I really do feel there needs to be an immediate moratorium on the carving up of units, because we are losing rent controlled housing units on a almost daily basis, I would say. And I think that, any permit that's issued by our own building and safety that's allowing for the carving up of these units, the construction of new walls, the installation of electrical potential. I know there's been this issue with locks being installed, although I think that that's not permitted. For building and safety, or for code enforcement, for the building department to say, we're just, reading the code, the letter of the code, and applying it as such. I mean, I think there needs to be some nuance here. And if there isn't, then we need some sort of immediate moratorium until a more permanent ordinance can be put in place, because we cannot afford to lose another unit. So I'm in strong support. I think this is a good resolution. And I thank you, staff, for bringing this to our attention. I think we all want to protect our rent controlled housing stock here. We do have a late comment. I think everyone's probably okay with taking a late public comment. Mr. Kairala, you have 3 minutes if you want to come up.
Good evening, everyone. How can I turn this on? It's on. Okay. Hello, everyone. I do have a comment. The only reason I'm here tonight is because my neighbor that lives upstairs is an old man. He's 80 years old, and he suffers from gout. And he just got the manager told him that they need to fix his carpet. He's been living there for 40 years. And he said to me that with the proposal, they also want them to sign a lease agreement.
So question, is this pertaining to the resolution that we have before us on that we're setting to City Council? Okay, all right, keep going. Sorry, just checking.
And he was asking me, they asking me to move to the unit in front. But I'm retired. I live under my pension, and I cannot afford the unit in front of me that I know they're renting for almost double that what I'm paying right now. What should I do, William? I said, you know what? I'm going to a meeting tonight. I will tell you, because I don't want to give you an ill advice. Because I really, even though I went to Dan's presentation yesterday, I'm still not clear what he needs to do. Can he refuse to get his carpet fixed? Can he move to the unit in front?
So, this is not, unfortunately, a question and answer session. We can't respond to the comments, and we actually have to take comments on the item before us. But Mr. Costello should definitely talk to you, and he can answer questions as our guru of rent control. So if you want to have a sidebar with him, I'm sure he can engage in a question and answer session with you. Okay. And so you can get some help, and maybe we can refer your friend to Mr. Costello as well. Thank you for your comment. Do we have any further comments on the resolution before us, 19003?
I would just move that we accept it and send it to City Council.
Yeah, I would second that, and I hope City Council is fastidiously watching our meeting and are hearing how impatiently we're waiting for this ordinance. So great, and thank you, staff. So I think I'm seconding that. Can we get a vote, Mr. Gwynn?
Commissioner Trosas?
Yes.
Commissioner Sultan? Yes. Commissioner Phyllis?
Yes.
Commissioner Drawn?
Yes.
And Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great. So moving on to our board discussion item 14A, request of Vice Chairperson Phyllis to consider adopting regulations and making recommendations to preclude municipal code land use violations from being used as the basis for eviction for rent control tenants, and specifically providing tenants variances, potentially that tenants could seek variances. Do you want to, I assume that you can go ahead and explain that for us. Go ahead, Commissioner Phyllis.
Yeah, so this item can be brief, but it recently came to my attention through a successful unlawful detainer action against a rent-controlled tenant that municipal code violations, which appear to be selectively enforced and are not consistently enforced through the city, at least as to the zoning code, were used as a basis to evict a rent-controlled tenant. And while there's obviously nothing that we can, as a rent control board, change about the outcome of that judicial decision, I think this does raise the issue of whether the municipal code land use violations, and specifically use of patio areas and balconies and other zoning type violations, can be misused to get tenants out of rent-controlled properties. And in this situation, it's my understanding that the tenant has significant difficulty in appealing and or challenging the underlying citations, because the tenant was informed that only the property owner and or property manager could seek a variance. Which puts tenants obviously in difficult positions, because if it's the tenant who has an underlying disability or justification for reasonable accommodation, they're basically dependent upon the property owner to pursue that variance for them. So this is an issue that I think could continue to percolate, one that's definitely captured my attention, and I know the attention of many of my colleagues, and also the attention of other folks who are concerned about tenant rights in the city. So I think it's a fairly easy fix in terms of, potential adjustments to the municipal code, and making sure that tenants basically have standing to cure violations that they maybe have caused. So that's my request. Super straightforward, and I hope we can have a consensus around it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and just, since no one else is in the queue, I support this. I think that we shouldn't be manipulating any of our codes as a form of tenant harassment. I'm not saying that has or hasn't happened, but it seems to me that we should make sure that there are no loopholes, and if there are ways to strengthen our code and ward against any of these instances of what I would consider harassment, I would be welcoming that discussion item. The opportunity to take action. So I'm fully supportive of this. Commissioner Foster.
So I have a question for Commissioner Phyllis. Are you can you restate what exactly you're suggesting we take action on? Because the item mentioned regulations and or recommendation to City Council. So I just wondered if you could outline for us what you have in mind.
So the discussion item would be to put an admin item on to determine whether there's any action the board can take from a regulatory perspective, since these are code sections under the municipal code, which are not in our jurisdiction. I'm assuming that our authority is fairly limited, but to the extent that there's anything that we can do, I'd like to consider it. Generally, what I have in mind is writing a strongly worded letter to City Council and calling on our our friends and colleagues on city council to kind of stand firmly with us and honor the city's tradition of renters' rights.
Would that be under Measure RR protections by any chance? Could that be dovetailed?
Well, Measure RR
Ability
I
to
thought
cure.
was a referendum, so we can't modify it by.
No, but I mean, quoting, it would seem consistent, is what I'm agreeing.
Yeah,
with you.
yeah, I think it's totally consistent with Measure RR. I think we can draw upon whatever authority we have to pursue this, and to the extent that it involves asking City Council to change the municipal code by ordinance, I support doing that. To the extent there is anything that we can do within our jurisdiction to include protections or advice or require landlords to afford tenants the opportunity to request that reasonable accommodation, I think we should do it.
Just consensus.
Yep. Okay. Anyone think differently? I think we're all supportive of getting further information and education as to our options here. Okay. All right. I do not see anything further on the agenda. I'm so impressed with how quickly we got through everything. So do I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor? Yes. I think we are hereby adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was... Oh, sorry. Really?